All right, let's kick off the new series of videos about daily carb nutrition. I've been asked my followers to make some tutorial videos about nutritional management of ruminants, especially dairy cows. So that's why today I'm gonna make the first series of dairy cow nutrition videos. Let's get started. So the first thing that we need to consider in feed formulation of dairy cows is really to pay attention to milk production curve, feed intake curve, and body weight curves. How these curves can change during the lactation, different periods of lactation, and also how we can manage it in such a way to improve the efficiency of the animal, and on the other hand, to decrease the potential metabolic disorders. For example, ketosis, fatty liver, acidosis, and other reproductive disorders. So, as you can see in this curve, the light yellow curve, or let's say white curve, shows the milk production. Here is x-axis actually is the month after parturition or calving. As you can see, after calving, milk production is going to start, and it goes up until around 2 or 3 months after parturition, which we call it peak milk production. And then it's going to decline. If we take a look at the yellow curve here, yellow dashed curve, we can see it shows dry matter intake or feed intake of animal. As you can see, just after calving, feed intake is low. Why? It has several reasons. First, because of calving stress. Second, because during the pregnancy, calf was pushing against the rumen and making less room for rumen and digestive system. That's why the appetite and feed intake capacity of the cow has been declined. And the third important factor is related to hormonal changes during the parturition. As you know, the dominant hormone during the pregnancy is progesterone. But as cow is going to give birth to the calf, the level of estrogen is going up. And estrogen is a hormone that can decrease the appetite and feed intake. That's why, because of these reasons, we can see a drop in feed intake just after the parturition. But it's not gonna stay low. And as you can see, the feed intake or dry matter intake is going up, and it reaches peak around 4 months after parturition. So there is a funny thing going on here, or let's say, not call it funny, call it weird thing, call it sneaky things. Because as you can see, peak milk production and peak dry matter intake are not happening at the same time. It means that when the milk production is at the highest level, let's say 2 or 3 months after parturition, we need to have the peak dry matter intake to support these milk production. But it's not the case. During the peak milk production, actually dry matter intake, as you can see, is low. And it's gonna peak after peak of milk production. And because of this lack of synchronization between peak of milk production and peak of dry matter intake, the cow is experiencing negative energy balance, different kinds of metabolic diseases. I would say any disaster comes to the cow is because of this lack of synchronization between dry matter intake peak and milk production peak. But on the other hand, cow needs to get these nutrients, get these energy requirement, nutrient requirement from somewhere to support the milk production, right? So she's gonna get it from losing body weight. As you can see, the red dotted curve here shows the body weight of cow. And as you can see, after parturition is going to drop until peak of milk production. It means that the cow is spending nutrient or is spending, let's say, body reserves to support milk production. So, is it good or not? Well, it's a natural thing. It's cow's physiology. I can't argue, but we need to minimize it because otherwise we will have problem. The cow will be in trouble of metabolic disorders, low performance, and etc. That's why we need to minimize body weight loss during the early lactation. So looking at these curves, I would draw some take-home messages. First, the concept of negative energy balance. It means that if you subtract energy excretion in milk from energy intake coming from food, it will give us the energy balance, right? And it should be positive. But unfortunately, because of low feed intake, we can see this balance is negative. It means that cow is spending more energy, more nutrients than what she has received from feed. And that's the problem. That's why energy balance is negative during early lactation. And the more body weight loss we have, the more negative energy balance the cow will experience. That's why we need to manage it. So, first take-home message, minimize negative energy balance. You can search about these concepts that I'm bringing up, but I'll try to make some videos specifically talking about this stuff. The second take-home message I can draw from this curve, as I said, is the lack of synchronization between peak of milk production and the peak of dry matter intake. How should I solve this problem? That's a really good question. By increasing dry matter intake, by encouraging cow to consume more feed. But how? I'm gonna talk about that a little bit later in the next slides. The next take-home message I can get from this curve is about milk production curve. So you can see the peak area around 3 months after parturition. So if we can increase the level of peak production, in fact, the total amount of milk production during the whole lactation period will be increased. And that's the good news. And I'm gonna talk about that as well, how we can manage it. And the last take-home message from this curve is persistency of milk production. It means that the slope of a milk production curve, how fast or how slow the milk production is going to come down. We call it persistency. And in my next episode, I'll talk about persistency more specifically, and also as a factor to evaluate a nutritional management system of a dairy herd. Okay, let's move on to next slide. So, as we saw in the previous slide, we can classify the lactation period into 3 different periods. Early lactation, which starts from calving until 3 months after calving. Mid lactation, 4 months until 7 months after calving, or we can say 100 days in milk until 200 days in milk, DIM. It's not DMI. DMI means dry matter intake, but DIM means days in milk. And the late lactation is 8 months until 10 months, or 200 days in milk until 305 days in milk, or until, end of the production. So the thing is that we need to categorize our herd, our dairy herd, into 3 sections, our lactating cows. And we need to feed each group separately. That's the key point. A high-producing cow should not be fed at the same time or at the same place with the low-producing cow, or let's say a cow with a moderate level of milk production. They need to be fed separately. With different feed. We need to formulate different feeds for each group. The most important part is transition cows. Transition from pregnancy to lactation. If you can manage this period, transition period, you will succeed, for sure, no doubt. But if you have problem in managing transition period from the nutritional standpoint, most likely you will end up with different disasters, different metabolic disorders in your herd. So transition period actually is 15 days before calving until 30 days after calving. So the window is 15 days before calving until 1 month after calving. We call it transition period. It has been made out of 2 different periods. The first period, 15 days before calving until calving, which is part of dry period, we call it close-up period. And after calving, until 30 days after calving, this 1 month, we call it fresh cows. So, or let's say early lactation, which is a part of early lactation. So we really need to manage transition period very well. Otherwise, we will be in trouble. So I'll talk about management of transition period in the next videos as well. So let's talk about early lactation. What is the, or let's say, what are the characteristics of early lactation? The first characteristic is that milk production is going to reach the peak level or maximum level. The second characteristic is drop in body weight and also increase in negative energy balance due to drop in feed intake. So the key point during the early lactation is maintaining feed intake or dry matter intake in a reasonable level, in a good standard level, such that we can maintain high milk production. So how can we manage it? How can we increase feed intake during the early lactation? First, let's take a look at nutritional management during early lactation. So first thing we need to consider is forage. Forage should contain enough fiber particles with at least 2.6 centimeter length, because we want to stimulate rumination and chewing, so that by increasing the level of concentrate in the final diet, the cow should not experience any disorders related to drop in ruminal pH, I mean acidosis. So that's why our forage particle size should be maintained in a standard level. If it's shorter than 2.6 centimeter, we might experience acidosis. If it is longer than 2.6 centimeter, in that case, it's gonna increase the filling index of the feed in rumen, and it's gonna limit the feed intake. It means that if we are feeding high level of forage, or let's say longer than standard particle size of forage, we will end up with a rumen that is packed with forage, with fiber, and there is less room for consuming the concentrate. The second element is dietary NDF and ADF. NDF is a neutral detergent fiber, and ADF means acid detergent fiber. We need to maintain NDF level around 28% and ADF level around 19%. That's being said, NDF is not an excellent indicator of fiber quality of the feed, or let's say rumination index, chewing index of the feed. No, we have other elements like effective NDF and physical effective NDF, or PENDF. I will show how we can use NDF or PENDF in balancing the forage to concentrate ratio in the diet. The third important thing that we need to keep in mind is not to change the diet during early lactation substantially, because the microbial population of the rumen need to be adapted to the new feed, to the new changes. If you change the feed suddenly, those microbial population cannot adapt to the changes in the feed, and you are losing the digestive, or let's say fermentation factory of the cow, and the cow cannot use or cannot utilize the nutrient of feed efficiently. The fourth important factor that we need to take into consideration is adding concentrate gradually during the first 2 weeks of early lactation. It's related to the previous comment. If you are going to add concentrate suddenly to the feed, you're gonna end up with acidosis and other problems. And the last part is dietary protein, which needs to be maintained around 17% to 19%, and 30% to 35% of the dietary protein should be rumen undegradable protein. It means that we should protect high quality protein from being degraded by the microbial population of the rumen. We need to escape those high quality protein from the rumen. And this is the idea. 30 to 35% of your dietary protein should be undegradable protein. Okay, so we talked about reduction in feed intake during the early lactation, after parturition. But if we want to increase the dry matter intake, we need to understand the factors that can affect dry matter intake in dairy cows. So the first factor is milk production level. As milk production level goes up, the dry matter intake will go up as well. It means that in high-producing cows, we need to manage these low feed intake challenge wisely. Otherwise, the cow will not be able to get nutrient requirements and will end up with severe negative energy balance, which we don't want to have that problem. The second thing is forage quantity and quality. This is really, really important. I'll talk about forage quantity in my next videos, and I'll show you how different methods of calculating the forage quantity in the diet can affect our precision, can affect our accuracy. So, and at the end of the day, I'll introduce the most accurate method for calculating the forage quantity. What I mean by forage quantity is that if you want to avoid limiting dry matter intake, you need to feed the minimum level of forage in your diet. When I say minimum level, I mean the minimum level that can prevent acidosis and those kind of problems. To find that minimum level, we need to dive into advanced formulas, advanced concepts, and I will talk about that in my next videos. But as a clue, if you want to search it up, if you want to be prepared, we need to take PENDF or physical effective NDF into our consideration. And we need to calculate forage quantity based on physical effective NDF, which I will talk about that more in the next videos. And also I talked about forage quality, right? What I mean by forage quality, let's say I'm gonna feed my cows alfalfa. So this alfalfa can be early bloom, mid bloom, or late bloom, right? So as the maturity of forage is going up, the quality of forage is going down. Let's say if you are feeding your cows by early blooming alfalfa, the protein level of your forage is high. On the other hand, the fiber level of your forage is low, which is good. It means that it is highly digestible. But if you wait until end of blooming and, you know, end up with mature forage, its protein has been declined and its fiber has gone up. And indigestible fiber is up in mature forage, and you shouldn't feed your fresh cows during early lactation with such forage. So that's why we need to really pay attention to the forage quality. My advice is that when an alfalfa field, you know, has reached 10% or 15% blooming, it's the time to harvest it and feed the cows with that forage. it has good amount of protein, around 15%, and it is highly digestible with low fiber. So pay really deep attention to the forage quality for fresh cows. In that case, you are encouraging cow to increase her dry matter intake. So the next item is feed digestibility. I talked about forage digestibility a little bit in the previous item, but here when I'm talking about feed digestibility, I'm talking about the mixture of forage and concentrate. So you can consider feed processing, you can search it up. Feed processing can be either physical feed processing like cutting, cutting the forage in proper size, rolling the grains, flaking the grains, heat processing, chemical processing. For example, let's say if you are going to process your fibrous materials with ammonia or urea, you can use a chemical processing. Overall, feed processing can increase feed digestibility. If you have a more digestible feed, your animal can consume it more and can experience less negative energy balance. The next item, which is really important, is feeding frequency and feeding method. So when I'm talking about feeding frequency, I can think of increasing feeding frequency to at least 5 or 6 times per day. It means that we are limiting the amount of feed in each meal, but we are increasing the feeding frequency. By that, we are encouraging the cows to consume more feed. And also feeding method. You can feed forage and concentrate separately, but it's not a good idea. If you want to increase dry matter intake, the best way is to use TMR or total mixed ration. It means that you need to mix the forage and concentrate together in such a way they cannot separate it. In such a way, the cow cannot have, selective feed intake to avoid selective feed intake. It means that in one bout, the cow should consume forage and concentrate together. You can search it up. You can see how you can prepare a standard and high quality TMR ration. And if you have any question, let me down there in the comments, and I'll try to answer your questions about these items. Really, there are lots of things going on. And in a short video, I'm not able to dive into each single item. I'm just introducing these items, and I'll expect you, if you have any questions, just let me know, and I'll try to either make other videos about that, or let's say just comment, my answer for your question. So the next item is ingredients compatibility. For example, I'm talking about nitrogen and energy synchronization. If you are feeding highly readable nitrogen, you need to feed highly fermentable carbohydrate, because a fuel for microbial population in the rumen is nitrogen and energy. Energy comes from fermentation of starch and carbohydrates, right? But the idea is to synchronize the release of nitrogen from the feed and energy from the fermentable products in your diet. This is really important. And again, I'll try to make more videos to dive into this more deeply. And as I talked already, we need to increase the concentrate gradually. So let's move on to mid-lactation. What's going on during mid-lactation? During the mid-lactation, the cow is gonna reach peak dry matter intake, which is late, right? We needed to reach peak of dry matter intake during early lactation, not in the mid-lactation, which is unfortunate. But again, it's what it is, and we need to manage it. We need to minimize the risk factors. We need to manage as much as we can. DMI, or dry matter intake, should reach the peak around 4% of body weight at least 10 weeks after calving. Diet should be able to maintain a robust persistency level. I'll talk about the persistency in my next video, but here I'm gonna just introduce it. Persistency, if you're gonna calculate the persistency of milk production in your cows, you can use this formula. The current month's milk production divided by last month's milk production times 100. Maybe you will end up with a number like 92%, 90%, I don't know, 94%. So the more, the better. The higher number, the better persistency. Keep this in mind. For each kilogram of extra milk production at peak, the total milk production level will increase by 200 to 225 kilogram per lactation period. For example, let's say if you have a cow with peak production like, I don't know, 47 kilogram. If you can increase the peak milk production just by 1 kilogram, I mean, increase 47 to 48, it's not just that 1 kilogram during the peak production. In fact, your total milk production per lactation period is gonna increase by 200 to 225 kilograms. That's awesome. That's why one of our goals should be increasing peak production as much as possible. Again, maintaining a robust level of dry matter intake during this period is a key factor in a successful nutritional management. You know, increasing dry matter intake is a key factor either in early lactation period, mid lactation, or late lactation. We need to pay heed to that. And the concentrate level should not exceed 2.3% of body weight during mid-lactation. And on the other hand, non-forage fiber sources can be included in the diet at the expense of dietary starch. Then we are talking about NFFS, or non-forage fiber source. It can be soybean hull, it can be beetroot, it can be other sources of fiber which are not forage, but they contain fiber. And dietary protein should be around 15 to 17% of the dry matter. So the last part is late lactation. In late lactation, you will see decrease in milk production and feed intake, which is natural. Increase in body weight, it means that cow is going to compensate those, losses in body weight. And also dietary protein and energy sources can be selected from cheap sources like NPN or non-protein nitrogen, for example, urea and molasses. So you can practice least cost diet formulation during late lactation. But please do not apply least cost feed formulation during early lactation. If you want to have a robust cow with a high performance, you need to just pay attention to meeting her nutrient requirement with high quality feed during early lactation. Do not feed the cow with low quality and cheap ingredients during the early lactation. Save those cheap stuff for the late lactation. Okay, I guess that's enough for this episode. In my next episode, I'm gonna talk about evaluation method of nutritional management in a dairy herd. It means that I will talk about how you can really evaluate nutritional management system of a dairy herd by looking at some criteria. Which criteria you need to take a look at and tell the farmer, okay, you've been doing a great job, good job, or unfortunately, when I can give an advice that I can evaluate the milk production, feed intake, I don't know, body condition score of the cows. And then I can say, okay, you did a good job, we can improve it or whatever. So in my next episode, I'll talk about this and I'll dive deeply into this topic. Please let me know if you have any questions down there in the comments, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.